A false victory in storytelling refers to a moment where the protagonist appears to achieve their goal or win a battle, but the victory is ultimately short-lived or comes at a significant cost, leading to further complications and setbacks. A protagonist is the good guy in a story, and the antagonist is the bad guy in the story. Joni Lamb believes that she is the protagonist or the good guy in the Daystar saga. She believes that the antagonists are the people speaking out on social media, the podcasters. This week we learned that Colleyville PD closed their investigation in regard to the allegations of SA that involved Jonathan and Susie Lamb's daughter and Joni's granddaughter. So that investigation has officially closed. But this is not surprising to me whatsoever. In fact, I really did think that it was closed previously. But now we have that official news that it is closed. What is laughable to me is that Joni appears to believe that this is some sort of victory to her. Daystar Television Network. Did you know that they have a Facebook page? What is Facebook? Is it social media? That thing that Joni says she's never on? Well, Joni's social media account on Facebook for Daystar, which she owns, that billion-dollar company, they issued a media statement. It is very interesting to me that they're using social media to issue a statement. When Joni and Doug claim to not engage in social media whatsoever because, anyone who is on it is a fool, like people you'd see at a bar. You know what I'm talking about. It's really laughable to me that Joni's billion-dollar empire has a social media account. And with her on her show, in a straight face, she gets on her show to bewitch her listeners into believing that she has nothing to do with social media. It's like, look over here. Don't pay attention to what I'm saying. Don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain. It's just so funny. So the media statement that's posted to social media, the social media statement by Joni Lamb, was posted on May 14, 2025, and I'm going to go through it. It reads, following a comprehensive investigation, Daystar learned through counsel today that Colleyville PD has officially closed its investigation with no further action or charges into allegations of abuse involving a child in the Lamb family. Is that statement with no further action or charges accurate? No. It's a false statement. Why is this a false statement? Well, because Susie was quoted in the newspaper as saying that she understood that it was being closed because the perpetrator was not identified, not enough evidence in that regard, and the investigators, in fact, told her that it would be reopened once the perpetrator is identified. So this would be a false statement. The original police report filed, this goes on, her social media, Joni's social media statement. The original police report filed several years ago alleged that an unidentified classmate of the child committed the alleged abuse. In November of 2024, media reports surfaced falsely accusing another Lamb family member identified as Pete in the reporting of committing the alleged abuse. Daystar fully cooperated with law enforcement's investigation. In addition, Pete denied any wrongdoing and he voluntarily agreed to be interviewed by the Colleyville PD. Pete also voluntarily sat for and passed 2 separate lie detector tests performed by 2 independent, highly experienced experts. I have a problem with this statement because it's misleading. It's misleading because the statement where it says that Pete voluntarily agreed to be interviewed by Colleyville PD is immediately followed by alleging that he voluntarily sat for and passed 2 separate lie detector tests. That would signal or lead someone to believe that it was Colleyville PD that administered the lie detector tests. I don't believe that's the case. And if I'm wrong, somebody tell me. But I don't believe that he ever sat for a Colleyville PD lie detector test. Now, we know that lie detector tests really don't mean much. When I was a prosecutor, they were used. I did, in fact, want to see that the detectives were going to use a lie detector test when they brought somebody in, because especially in SA, child SA, you have the child's testimony, but it would be really helpful if you can get the defendant to make an admission as well. And so even if they went through the lie detector test, before and after, they're talking to the defendant, well, the potential defendant. They haven't charged him yet, right? So in that scenario, they're talking to him, and sometimes just during talking about what to expect during the lie detector test, some of them will just confess. So I believe that that statement is misleading. It might not be entirely false. Perhaps we know that he likely sat for lie detector tests through Doug's company. All right, the statement goes on. No evidence has ever existed implicating Pete in any crime, and no charges are being brought against Pete. Well, at this time, it's not absolute. It goes on. The absence of any evidence of any wrongdoing by Pete is underscored with the closing of this investigation, which further confirms there was never any mishandling, as falsely argued by some on social media on the part of Daystar and its leadership. I love how she has to keep looping that in about social media, which she is using for her statement. So you can't say that there's no evidence of wrongdoing. We know that there is. We just don't have the perpetrator identified. So that's misleading. We know that a crime was committed. It goes on. As it has said from day one, Daystar Television Network takes all allegations of sexual misconduct very seriously. We grieve for and give credence to the voice of every victim of abuse. In this matter, however, there is simply no evidence that any alleged abuse was ever committed by Pete. So, they grieve for and give credence to the voice of every victim of abuse. Do they? Do any of you believe that? Is there any evidence that would support that statement? So this is a billion-dollar company. Perhaps they should give some money to any type of organization that helps victims of SA, sex trafficking, anything like that. Is there any evidence of that? Do we know that? I'm seriously asking, does anybody know that they do that? Because maybe that would support that statement, but I'm not aware of it. They go on. Although saddened by those who are led to believe the gossip, rumor, and false accusations promulgated on social media, Daystar appreciates the love and support it has received from countless viewers and ministry partners, and will continue in its mission to spread the good news of Jesus Christ around the world. I can tell you one thing. People don't want to hear your good news about Jesus Christ across the world, knowing that you're involved with cover-up of an SA against your granddaughter, and all of those audio recordings of you beating down your son. I don't think that they really have a stomach for your good news, Joni. That's just my opinion. So let's back up for a minute. The Dallas newspaper reported that this was a 1.5-year investigation, but Joni, in her social media statement, said it was 2 years. Why is this important? I'll tell you why. It's important because that is a really long investigation. It really is. So there's no dispute that the child never identified the abuser. We know that. But the child outcried to Susie, her mom, in regard to the actual crime, the act, the SA. So we've got the crime. The other component is identification of the perpetrator, which we don't have. And we've known that all along. Consider a robbery where someone is masked. They come up to you and they're wearing a ski mask and they pull out a gun and they say, give me all of your money and your jewelry. And you do that. But you're unable to identify that robber. But a crime was committed. You were robbed. But the identity of the perpetrator remains unknown. And perhaps you'll never know who that perpetrator is. But that doesn't negate the fact that a crime was committed. In this case, the Daystar saga, the investigation was open for, let's even go with 1.5 years. We can go with Joni's social media statement of 2 years. That tells me that the police took this very, very seriously. I've never seen an investigation open for that long, knowing that the victim has not identified the perpetrator. In my experience, even if a crime is known to have committed, but it is clear that the perpetrator remains unknown, it's closed within days. So I find that very interesting here that a 1.5 to 2 year investigation, Joni is calling a victory. And so much so that she's going onto social media that she doesn't use to tell everybody about it. A 1.5 investigation tells me that there were diligent, hardworking investigators on the case, and this is corroborated by Susie's words to the newspaper where she was quoted. And in it, she said that one of the investigators told her that once her daughter identifies the perpetrator, this will be reopened. And in fact, he would even come out of retirement. What does that tell you? There's been zero evidence brought by Joni or her minions that a sexual assault did not occur. There's no evidence of that. It's undisputed. So we're left with that undisputed fact that an SA, a crime against a 5-year-old, occurred. And that's where we're left with today. But if you are familiar with how these cases go, these children grow up and they do eventually disclose. Some never do, but some do. Let's talk about Cindy Clemenshire. She's the victim of Robert Morris. She actually disclosed rather quickly. She was 12 years old at the time of the first assault. And it is my understanding that she disclosed at age 17. Now, things didn't go the way that perhaps they could have or should have. But she did disclose within 5 years, and that's actually rare. Let's talk about Faith Life Church. And let me just stop here just to tell everybody, because I'm going to be talking about Sean Combs, that trial. So I'm not going to get into the details of it because it's really sick, but it's still a trigger warning, because just knowing that that trial is going on could be a trigger to somebody. So I'm just giving you that warning now that if it's going to upset you, just stop here. You don't have to listen. Obviously, that's up to you. But let's talk about Faith Life Church, right? And just recapping, we know that Tom Keesee has been charged with 27 counts of felony crimes against children, all under the age of 13. And there's 3 victims that have been charged. He's sitting in jail today. The allegations are that Tom's sister, Kirsten, did make the abuse known to her parents. So that means she did disclose before 2024. I don't know exactly when, but she did disclose. It is my understanding that another victim disclosed and that Gary and Drenda knew about it. I don't know exactly when, but it was well before 2024. So in both of those disclosures occurred rather quickly in the context of the statistics, because the statistics tell us that it could take decades. In fact, that somebody the age of 52, they would make it to 52 before they would disclose an assault that occurred when they were a child. So we're actually seeing a rarity here with Cindy Clemenshire and with Faith Life Church. So going back to Daystar and Jonathan and Susie's daughter, that disclosure can come anytime. It can be tomorrow. It can be next week. It can be months or years from now. But once she discloses, they open it back up. My friend John T. texted me the other day. He had a question on one of his videos. A commenter asked, if Baby Lamb speaks out about Pete, will the authorities prosecute right away, or does there need to be an investigation before he's arrested? And John asked me to address this. So they've been investigating for 1.5 years. I would suspect that they have the evidence that they need. They're just looking for the identity of the perpetrator. So prosecution and investigation are two different things. The investigation is through the investigating agency, which would be state police, county police, local police, FBI, whatever. In this case, it would be state. It would be Colleyville, the city, Colleyville PD. They have jurisdiction. If Baby Lamb were to disclose tomorrow, they just go right back down to Colleyville PD, open it back up, perform a forensic interview on my child, and that would be done. And then after that, it goes to the prosecutor, because the prosecutor is the one that would have to do the actual charging. A warrant would get issued and there would be an arrest. And we would see very similar to what we have seen with Tom Keesee. If there was an arrest, they would attempt to get a statement, but we already know that Pete is lawyered up, so I wouldn't expect one. And so they would just go forward with the child's testimony. So I want to talk to you about the Sean Combs trial, kind of comparing things to the Tom Keesee anticipated trial. The reason so is because the Sean Combs trial has essay in there, right? But there's a lot of differences. There's some similarities. And it also gives you an idea of what to look for, because this is happening in real time. And so we can talk about that in real time, about things that we could expect, perhaps, in the trial of Ohio against Tom Keesee. We know that the jury trial against Tom Keesee is scheduled for July 1st. Is it going to go forward that day? I highly doubt it. But I anticipate that the longer he stays in jail, the quicker we're going to see a jury trial come up. All right, so let's talk about some differences. So first off, Sean Combs, if you don't know him or what's going on, then you must live under a rock. He has been charged. He has been charged with 5 counts. There's actually 3 counts, but there's 2 of each. So there's a racketeering conspiracy, and then there's sex trafficking, and then there's moving across state lines, I think it is. Let me see if I have it. Transportation to engage in prostitution or move. Yeah, so that's the moving across the state lines. And I believe that, okay, so it's just 1 count of the racketeering conspiracy. and then the other two are two of each. There were 3 victims, to my understanding, in the Sean Combs trial. And if you haven't heard this week, if you haven't followed it at all, one of the victims is missing. All right, so first off, it's a federal trial that Sean Combs has. Federal trials are never videotaped. They don't have any of that coverage. So we have to rely on reporters that are actually going there. They're either in the courtroom or they're in an overflow room. And Tom, on the other hand, he's charged in a state court. So you might ask, what are the differences? Well, federal courts, federal prosecutions typically have a higher conviction rate. That's just generally known. In particular, the prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office that are prosecuting Sean Combs have an extraordinarily high rate of conviction. It's about 95%. There's some things that I'm concerned with, and I'm going to share them with you, and you can share your thoughts if you are following that case. You know, and I've even mentioned this before, I thought that because it was coming out of that particular office, the Southern District of New York, that this would be a slam dunk. Now, we're only 1 week in, and we have at least 8 weeks left in the Sean Combs trial. My opinion could change daily. That's how it goes. You know, you get information, get evidence in, you see how evidence is going in. I'll talk about that a little bit. How the players are, you know, it's the defense attorney, the prosecutors, how things are working, meshing, all of that stuff. There's all kinds of factors in there that's going on. And so after week 1, I'm not so sure. I don't have the confidence that I thought that I would have. And I'll get to that in a minute. So let's talk about some parallels. Tom Keesee comes from a wealthy family. Brenda and Gary have a megachurch, and they also own businesses. They're also on Daystar. There's no doubt that they're wealthy. Sean Combs is wealthy. His wealth certainly, I would suspect, surpasses that of the Cassees. But that's a similarity. And the mega ministries that we're covering, we see that they don't like people coming out and talking about them and about the things that they're doing. They don't like it. If you look up anything about Sean Combs, you'll hear the same thing, that he doesn't like that either. And there are allegations that people get in accidents, people are missing, all kinds of things happen. In my last video, I talked about Tom Keesee in regard to Sean Combs. Do you remember that? There was a video where he was sitting with his mother. That's what I was describing. I didn't show the video, just to remind you about that if you're wondering or confused. I was talking about a video that I had reviewed. And Tom and his mother are just sitting there having a conversation. They're talking about a number of things. Really, I mean, her alleged concern for children, you know. And she's asking Tom what he thinks about Sean Combs, because at that time, his 2 homes, one in Miami, one in LA, had been raided. And Tom was saying things like, I'm not at all surprised, you know, referring to the sexual proclivities. And he said, I would expect things like this with celebrities. And it's so ironic because, you know, he's sitting in jail right now, charged with 27 counts of SA against children. It's ironic. So, still in jail, can't make the $2 million bond, or can make it, and what's going on there? Let me give you my thoughts. So, my initial impression, and I've bounced this around in my mind, I've not shared it, so I'll share it now, as to why he has not made bond. This is my opinion. I could be wrong. It's just, I'm sharing my opinion. I believe that perhaps Drenda doesn't want to pay it. Why doesn't she want to pay it? Because she doesn't want to lose $2 million. Why would she lose $2 million when he's got a GPS and he has to relinquish his driver's license? He has to relinquish his passport. Do you really think that he can't get a fake ID? Do you really think that he can't cut off the GPS monitor? Do you really think that sitting here right now, he's in his 5th weekend in the county jail, he's not pissed and he doesn't like to be caged up? He's lived a life of luxury his whole life. Do you think he's not talking to people in jail? Do you think maybe he's talking to people that may have gone through the Department of Corrections and maybe telling them things? Do you think maybe he never wants to go back there again, let alone to prison? It's just a thought. Because if Drenda and Gary do pay the $2 million and he absconds, takes off, they lose that money. Just a thought. Maybe they don't want to gamble. So while federal court also has higher conviction rate, their sentencing can be more, typically is more, but not with Tom. We're dealing with 1st-degree felony R word. If he is even convicted on one of those, he is looking at a minimum of at least 10 years, could be more, because an aggravating factor could be, argued, the fact that these children were the ages that they were. At sentencing, a judge can downward or upward depart if they have certain aggravating factors. So this is premature, but it's just something to consider. I think, and this is my opinion right now, it could change, that Sean Combs has a better chance of getting a not guilty verdict than Tom Keesee. I say may. There's always other factors. Just like I said, it could change. First off, in Sean Combs' case, we're dealing with adult victims. That is typically harder. If you haven't watched it, well, you can't watch the trial, but if you haven't watched any coverage on it in regard to commentators, then you might not know. But all of the victims are adults, and it's very difficult because he can always argue, which he is, consent, that they're kinky, that they have this kinky lifestyle, swinger lifestyle. And so he's arguing that Cassy Ventura consented. Of course, her testimony is that she did not. So let me just touch on this. What I expected to see from the prosecution was a seasoned prosecutor. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying anything bad about the prosecutors whatsoever. I am sure that they are excellent prosecutors. I just expected, because this is such a high-level media case, that there would be a seasoned prosecutor. Someone with gray hair is the best way I can describe it. It's just me. Maybe it doesn't bother you. It's just something that I was expecting. Another thing about the prosecution team that I didn't know until this week is that there's 6 of them, and they're all young white females. All 6. Why do I bring that up? Do I have anything about young white females? No. However, when you have a jury in a city, you have diversity. And I would find it hard to believe that every juror is going to resonate with each and every young white prosecutor. I would have at least have liked to seen, at the very least, one male. If you didn't have a male in your unit, why couldn't you have brought somebody in from another unit? It's just a question. It might not have anything ultimately to do with the outcome, but just these are things that, we consider when we're getting ready for trial. And if any of you remember the O.J. Simpson trial, you may not know this, but a lot of high-profile cases, they go through a mock trial. A mock trial is a fake trial. And there are consulting companies that they'll hire, and they'll go through at least voir dire, where they're questioning the fake jury. They'll go through opening and closing. They'll go through some of the evidence, but they really want to gauge the performance of the prosecutor or the defense, whoever hires them. So in the O.J. Simpson trial, the prosecutors did that. And what did they learn? They learned that African American women did not resonate with Marcia Clark. She knew that. Did you know that the majority of the jury on the O.J. Simpson trial were African American women? That's a problem. It's something that you have to deal with. And if you don't, then you could be messing up the case. Now, I'm not saying that here in Sean Combs' case, but again, I would have liked to have seen at least a male and maybe some diversity, because I'll bet that there's some diversity on that jury panel. I mentioned before, you have evidence, right? The evidence is the testimony. The evidence could be videos. Well, we know videos, especially in the Sean Combs. Everybody has seen the video where Sean Combs kicked and beat Cassy Ventura in a hotel hallway. So the most powerful evidence, it can be video, but it's not always. It's typically coming from the witness stand. That's really what drives a case. And that's what the jury listens to. And when I say that how the evidence goes in, it's something that, if you're a trial attorney, okay, you could have this great evidence, but how did it go in? Like clunky? Was there, fumbling? And based upon what I've heard and listened to, the comments, the reporting, is that the evidence, that the cross-examination was kind of scattered and all over the place. The cross-examination is performed by the defense attorney, and they were cross-examining the first victim, Cassy. Now, they want to discredit her, and I believe that they did a good job in attacking her credibility. I found it, and here's why. So on direct, Cassy's making out all the elements. She's talking about all what happened to her. And I didn't hear anybody report that any of the prosecutors took the sting out of the fact that there were existing text messages that Cassy would have with Sean Combs after he beat her, after he allegedly did this and that. And they were loving messages. That could hurt you, because remember, his defense is that she was cooperative. She had consent. She was a willing participant. And so there was this evidence dump by the defense in the middle of last week of approximately 400 documents. And they were text messages and emails back and forth between Cassy and Sean Combs. And the defense wanted to use them to impeach her. Well, they eventually did. And I believe that some people thought that it wasn't the best job. I thought it was a good job that they did, from what I understood. That is exactly what you would do as a defense attorney. You're trying to discredit the witness. However, it was also reported that Sean was passing notes to his attorney, and if that's the case, and trying to get the attorney to ask Cassy certain questions, that can really disrupt the flow. I don't know if that was happening, because it's hard, because remember, it's a federal case, so we can't see it. But based on what is being reported, if that's what was happening, that could have been the explanation as to why the cross-examination was scattered. So let's talk about Tom Keesee's case. There will be 3 victims, all female. They're all adults now, and they are going to be testifying about what happened to them when they were a child in the hands of Tom Keesee. The defense will be able to cross-examine them. And if you already know this, you know that his attorney is a male. Why is that important? There's other things than just evidence. You have to think about who's going to conduct the cross-examination. If I was Tom's attorney, the male, I would say, I need to get a female on here. I'm not going to do it. I can't imagine that he's going to do it. If he is, let's watch. I think he'll crash and burn. You gotta have a female. So maybe he will. Maybe he'll bring in a female. That's my opinion. You just got to do it. And so here's just, there's also the mob behavior, the mob tactics. That's the similarities between Sean Combs and these mega ministries. Daystar Mafia, very similar. So, talking about the attorney, Tom's attorney is male. What will that look like to the jury if his attorney, a male, is cross-examining these young ladies? Remember, it's not just the evidence. You've got to consider, your judge. What type of judge do you have? There are good judges, there are bad judges, there are so-so judges, there's all kinds of judges. And even though the fact finder in these cases are the jury, meaning they're the ones that are listening to the evidence, they're the ones that have the ability to determine who they're going to accept, who they're not, any evidence they're going to reject, whatever. It's up to the jury, not the judge. The judge is like the mediator. He's going to rule on the objections. There was a really good judge that I watched a couple years ago. Maybe it was a year ago. I can't even remember, on a court TV trial, and it was out of Connecticut. I can't remember the name of the case at all, but the judge was exceptional. The judge that was in the Alec Murdaugh case, if you watched that judge was exceptional. The judge in the Karen Reed trial, not so much. I don't know anything about the judge in Tom Keesee's case. Now, that's a state judge, but we'll find out. So, going back to cross-examining the victims in the Tom Keesee case, if he does it, the male attorney, he's got to tread lightly, because the jury might not like that. You're performing for the jury. Yes, you're putting on your case, but you have to be aware. You can't stare at them. You can't be an Amber Heard, but you have to be aware of what's going on with your jury. Now, with Sean Combs, they have 6 prosecutors. I am sure that every time that somebody is examining a witness, they've identified a couple of their team members, other prosecutors, to gauge the jury, see how they're responding to certain things. I heard that the jury was getting really agitated with the defense in the Sean Combs case because of just one of the attorneys was putting up exhibits that were not already introduced into evidence. You can't do that. And I think that she was likely getting admonished by the judge. So in Tom Keesee's case, there's 3 victims, right? There's really not going to be any physical evidence that I anticipate. They're kids. They weren't texting, so that's different. You know, in the Sean Combs case, they have the texts and things like that. We're not going to have that in the Tom Keesee case. Tom Keesee, I heard, well, I watched this, so this is what I heard, is I anticipate that he's going to have, he might assert a defense that his sister was abused by her husband. Now, you might say, what does that have to do with anything? You're right. It doesn't have anything to do with anything. You can actually watch him say that. There's more body cam that came out this past week, and it shows him when he was getting arrested, and the investigators were talking to him and even said, I'd like to talk to you. And he said, I will once my attorney gets here, and I'd love to tell you about my sister's boyfriend, or I'm sorry, my sister's husband who abused her. What does that have to do with anything? And does that relate to when Brenda said that there's 2 sides to the story? What does that have to do with anything? So how does that fall in line with the fact that there are 2 other witnesses that have identified you, Tom? And here's another thing. You know, the defendant might not get along with his attorney. That's a reality. I believe that in the Sean Combs case, you know, he's paying them a lot of money. They have to tread lightly. They have to make sure that they keep him happy. But they also have to try the case, and they have to do the best that they can for the best outcome that they can get. But they also have to appease him. That's a tightrope walk. Now with Tom, if his mom is footing the bill, which I anticipate she is, she might try to call the shots with the attorney. But the attorney is the one that wants the control. They're supposed to have the control, right? It could be a problem. Are they going to say, hey, I want you to point out that Kirsten's husband abuses her? Now, first off, that's going to be an evidentiary issue, not coming out straight out the gate in front of the jury. It just doesn't work that way. If they try to bring that in, that's going to be something that will have to come before the judge. There has to be relevance. And you know what? It could be debunked by Kirsten and her husband, and even other people. And that just shows to me desperation, if that's what they're going to use. I can't imagine, but it's just something I've heard. But I can't even imagine. Tom is going to have such a difficult time. He's looking back. Well, the victims are looking back 10, 15 years. How can he possibly challenge what they say? What evidence will he have other than his own word to say, no, I wasn't there at that time? So that means he'll have to take the stand. The only other way is to try to discredit the witnesses by trying to impeach them. And like I said, I don't anticipate that there are any texts. I don't think that these 5 and 6 and 7 or 8-year-olds were texting. Now, we'll see as we go along. I don't know. I don't know what discovery is going to show. I'm just speaking in general terms. So, is Tom going to argue a Saudi defense? What's a Saudi defense? Some other dude did it. Well, it would appear that way if he's trying to say, oh, it's Kirsten's husband. But Kirsten, from my understanding, is saying that she was assaulted when she was a kid. She wasn't married. Is she trying? I don't know. I'm not even going to make up an excuse because I don't want to give people stupid things to think about, you know. But it's just strange. It's just very, very strange. So what would Tom's defense be? Let's watch and see. Because I can't imagine a defense. And as I've said, I think that Tom is going to have a difficult time. I think he is going to be found guilty, just simply based upon the number of charges, the fact that there's 3 witnesses, they were children. So there's no force that has to be proven. This is a statutory charge, statutory RAPE. All you have to do is show that the act occurred under the age of 13 in the county that it occurred in. That's it. And if the jury believes them, that's it. And a defendant never has to take the stand. And the jury will be told that and instructed on that. However, three victims, they're going to want to hear from him. So that is my analysis for this evening. And I anticipate that as we get closer and closer to the Tom Keesee trial, I'll have more to say, especially if we see that there are any motions that are filed. And if that trial date gets moved from July 1st. So what are your thoughts on anything that I covered in this video? I look forward to hearing from you. And I also look forward to seeing you in the next video. And let me remind you, my friend John T., who is probably your friend as well, as you likely may know, he is starting a separate YouTube channel. It's Remnant Online Church, and I'm going to link that here in the description and in a pinned comment so that you can have access to it easily. And I encourage you, if you do not have a church, that you check out John's online church. And I hope you're all having a great weekend. I will see you in the next video.